It was a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone knew each other by name, and the most thrilling events were weekend barbecues. The residents of Oak Ridge Lane never imagined that their tranquil lives would be shattered by a shocking crime, but beneath the seemingly perfect veneer of this community lay secrets that would eventually lead to murder. At the center of this drama were two families, the Petersons and the Carters. The Petersons had lived in the neighborhood for over a decade. John Peterson was a successful real estate agent, and his wife, Laura, was a stay-at-home mom who devoted her time to raising their two young children. To their neighbors, they were the epitome of a perfect couple. Next door lived the Carters. Daniel Carter was a retired police officer, and his wife, Marlene, worked part-time at the local library. Their only daughter, Emily, had just turned 21 and was known around the neighborhood for her vivacious personality and striking beauty. She was the pride of her parents, having recently graduated from college with honors. It was during one of those typical neighborhood gatherings that John first took notice of Emily. While everyone else was mingling and enjoying the barbecue, John found himself watching her from a distance. She was different from the girl he had seen grow up next door. She was now a young woman, confident and alluring, yet the attraction was instant, and it wasn't long before John and Emily found themselves stealing glances and exchanging flirtatious smiles whenever they crossed paths. The initial spark quickly ignited into a full-blown affair. They began meeting secretly, initially at a coffee shop miles away from the neighborhood, and later in the more secluded corners of Oak Ridge Lane, where no one would suspect their forbidden romance. What started as an impulsive affair soon turned into an obsession. John found himself risking more and more to be with Emily. He began lying to his wife, Laura, about late-night meetings with clients and business trips that didn't exist. He couldn't get enough of Emily's youth and vibrancy, a stark contrast to his monotonous life and strained marriage. For Emily, the affair was thrilling. She had always been drawn to danger, and John's mature demeanor and forbidden nature made him irresistible. She enjoyed the secrecy, the adrenaline rush of almost getting caught, and the power she held over a man nearly twice her age. But, as with most illicit affairs, things soon spiraled out of control. Laura, although initially unsuspecting, began to notice changes in her husband's behavior. He was distant, irritable, and frequently absent. He had also developed a habit of locking his phone and keeping it close. Even when he slept, the more she questioned him, the more evasive he became. One evening, Laura found herself unable to sleep. She reached for John's phone, which he had left charging on the kitchen counter. Her heart raced as she hesitated, knowing that what she might find could change everything, but she had to know the truth. Unlocking the phone with a combination of guesses, she finally gained access and felt her stomach drop. There, in the message thread with an unsaved number, were countless texts and photos from Emily. The explicit messages left no room for doubt. Her husband was having an affair with the young woman she had known since childhood. Shock turned into a cold, simmering rage as she scrolled through the messages, reading every sordid detail. She had given up her career to support John, to raise their children, and now this was how he repaid her. In a fit of anger, Laura smashed the phone against the wall, the shattering sound echoing through the empty kitchen. But she knew that confronting John at that moment would only lead to denial and lies. She needed to be smart to figure out what to do next, and, above all, she needed proof. Laura's world had been turned upside down. She could never have imagined that the man she loved would betray her in such a way. But as she lay awake that night, plotting her next move, she had no idea just how dark and twisted the situation would become. Laura's discovery of the affair was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, she meticulously gathered evidence of John and Emily's relationship, taking screenshots of their messages, noting down the times John would sneak out, and even following them to the motel they frequented on the outskirts of town. Her rage simmered under the surface, but she knew she had to stay composed. One rainy afternoon, Laura decided it was time to confront Emily. She waited outside the library where Emily's mother worked, watching as Emily stepped out, oblivious to the storm brewing around her. Laura approached her calmly, her voice steady as she said, "We need to talk." Emily's eyes widened, but she tried to play it cool. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, turning away. But Laura grabbed her arm, her grip like a vice. "Stay away from my husband," she hissed. "I know everything." For the first time, Emily looked afraid. She stammered something about how she and John were in love, but Laura cut her off. "He's not leaving me, Emily. And if you don't stop this, I'll make you regret ever stepping into our lives." Emily pulled free and hurried away, visibly shaken, but Laura didn't feel any satisfaction. She knew this wasn't the end. It was just a warning, a way to rattle Emily. And it worked, because that evening, John came home livid. "What the hell did you say to Emily?" he shouted the moment he walked through the door. Laura, expecting this confrontation, looked at him with icy calmness. "I told her the truth, John, that you're not going anywhere, that you're going to end this sick affair, and we're going to fix our marriage." John scoffed. "Fix our marriage? You destroyed it the moment you went behind my back and confronted her." His face was red, his fists clenched. "I love her, Laura. I'm leaving you." But Laura had anticipated this. She handed him a folder filled with the evidence she'd collected. "If you leave, I'll make sure everyone knows what a disgrace you are. Your clients, your friends, your family. I'll ruin you, John." John looked through the folder, his face turning pale. He hadn't expected Laura to be so methodical, so ruthless. He stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him, but Laura knew she'd bought herself some time. She had cornered him, and now she needed to figure out her next move. Meanwhile, Emily was losing her grip on John. After Laura's confrontation, John had become distant, his calls sporadic, their meetings rushed and furtive. He was clearly under pressure, and Emily, in a state of panic, began to wonder if he would really leave his wife for her. She had put everything on the line for this relationship, including her parents' trust, and now she felt it slipping away. Desperation led her to start drinking heavily, and during one such drunken stupor, she made a grave mistake. She showed up at the Petersons' house late one night, banging on the door and yelling for John. Laura, who had been half expecting something like this, opened the door with a triumphant smile. "Go home, Emily," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "You're embarrassing yourself?" But Emily wouldn't leave. "I know you're controlling him," she screamed. "I'll make him see that he doesn't need you." Laura, seeing an opportunity, pulled out her phone and began recording. "Go ahead, Emily. Tell me how you'll ruin my marriage. I'm sure John will love to see this." Emily faltered, realizing she was being recorded. She turned and staggered away, sobbing, while Laura watched, feeling a grim satisfaction. She had something more to use against her now. But as she watched Emily disappear down the street, she had a sense of foreboding. She knew Emily was unstable, and a person like that was dangerous. 2 nights later, John received a panicked call from Emily. "I need to see you. Now," she whispered, her voice frantic. "It's an emergency." Against his better judgment, John agreed to meet her at their usual spot. When he arrived, he found Emily trembling, her eyes wild. She was holding a small bag in her hands. "What is this?" he asked, confused and wary. "I can't live without you, John," she said, tears streaming down her face. "If you leave me, I'll kill myself." She opened the bag, revealing a small bottle of pills and a knife. John's heart raced. "Emily, put that away. Let's talk, okay?" But Emily was beyond reason. "You have to leave her, John. Leave her now, or I'll end it all right here." She pressed the knife to her wrist, and John lunged forward, grabbing her arm. In the struggle, the knife slipped from her hand, and she collapsed into his arms, sobbing. John managed to calm her down, promising her that he would take care of everything, that they would be together. But as he held her, he realized just how far things had gone. He was trapped between 2 women, and he didn't see a way out that wouldn't destroy them all. The night of the murder began like any other, but it would end in a way that no one could have imagined. John had made his decision. He was going to break things off with Emily once and for all. The turmoil and the constant fear of being exposed had become too much for him to handle. He realized that his life, his family, and his career were at stake. but he never got the chance to make that final break. It was around 11 p.m. when Laura heard the sound of John's car pulling into the driveway. She had been up, restless, her mind racing through the events of the past weeks. She watched from the window as John stepped out of the car, his shoulders hunched, his movements weary. She could see that he was carrying something, a small box wrapped in brown paper, curious and on edge. Laura decided to follow him. She crept down the stairs and watched as John headed straight to the garage. She knew something was wrong, a gut feeling that something terrible was about to happen. And then she heard another car pulling up, its headlights off. It was Emily. She got out of the car and stumbled towards the house, her face a mask of rage and desperation. Laura's heart pounded in her chest as she watched Emily march to the garage door, now slightly ajar. She could hear their voices, tense and muffled, as they exchanged heated words. "Why are you here, Emily?" John's voice was strained, barely contained. "I told you we can't do this anymore. I won't let you leave me, John," Emily cried, her voice echoing through the quiet night. "I'll make sure she pays for what she's done to us." Laura's blood ran cold. She had to do something. She grabbed her phone, her hand shaking, and dialed 911. But before she could press call, a loud crash from the garage made her drop the phone. Panic surged through her, and she ran to the garage door, peering through the crack. Inside, she saw Emily holding a gun, her hands trembling, tears streaming down her face. John was backing away, his hands up in a placating gesture. "Emily, put the gun down. We can talk about this." But Emily wasn't listening. "She took you from me, John. She turned you against me. I can't live without you. I won't." Her finger hovered over the trigger, her face contorted with rage and pain, while Laura's heart pounded in her ears as she realized what was about to happen. She had to stop it, but before she could move, the gun went off. The sound was deafening, reverberating through the garage and into the night. John stumbled backward, clutching his chest, blood seeping through his fingers as he collapsed to the floor. "No," Laura screamed, bursting into the garage. But it was too late. John lay motionless on the cold concrete, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Emily stood over him, the gun still in her hand, her face twisted in horror and disbelief at what she had done. Laura, driven by a surge of adrenaline and grief, lunged at Emily, knocking the gun from her hand. The two women struggled, screaming and sobbing, their rage and despair exploding in a violent confrontation. Laura managed to pin Emily down, her hands around her throat, squeezing with all the strength she had left. "You killed him," Laura screamed. She had left. "You killed him," Laura screamed, her voice raw and broken. "You ruined everything." But as Emily gasped for breath, her eyes bulging with terror, Laura hesitated. The reality of what she was doing hit her like a cold wave. The police burst into the garage, guns drawn, shouting commands that Laura could barely register. They pulled her off Emily and handcuffed them both, their questions a blur in the chaos that followed. Laura could only stare at John's lifeless body, her mind unable to process what had just happened. In the end, it was Emily who confessed to everything. She told the police about the affair, about how she had tried to convince John to leave Laura, and how she had brought the gun to force him to choose. She admitted to shooting him in a moment of blind rage when she realized he was never going to leave his wife. Laura, still in shock, was released without charges. The police ruled that she had acted in self-defense during the altercation with Emily, but nothing could erase the images from that night. The sound of the gunshot, the look on John's face as he fell, and the overwhelming sense of loss and betrayal that consumed her. Emily was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of John Peterson. The neighborhood was never the same after that night. The Petersons' house remained empty, a dark reminder of the violence that had shattered their peaceful lives. And Laura, forever haunted by the memory of that final confrontation, moved away, leaving behind everything she had once known.